Welcome back to Hacker Hangouts on Saturday morning, and always pumped to be here into the the journey into insanity, which is hacking. And it was funny because one of the topics we were thinking about, like as we were bouncing it around, was, well, what do we talk about? And then it was, well, we could talk about like all the different ways that hacking and a hacking career make you crazy, like moving into a leadership role. And Gourry, what did you say to me?
I said, don't do that. That's the topic of our last podcast, which is the death of hacking. That's how you stop being a hacker. I mean, I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but yeah, that's don't do that. Don't do that, or at least stay off as long as you can.
And
be a child.
And I think, look, again, I can personalize this because in some ways I am leadership, not really, but we'll call it leadership in some ways. But I think the kicker is like I still get like the technical pieces because I get to like mentor juniors and mentor other people in the company, work on those technical skills. So I get like the fun of discovery and curiosity, but I don't actually have to do the work. So it's like somehow in ways cheated the system. But
I feel like you just said the best part about being a leader is stealing other people's work.
little bit. It's that I have the joy of discovery, but I don't actually have to do the delivery. It's like somebody should go do this thing, and then you just like
yeah.
And it's not as bad as if you're married or you have a significant other going like somebody should clean the dishes. Just to all right. Jumping off here. I have family. It's holidays. It's Christmas around the corner, and we have this brilliant idea to get together as cousins. And there's like 10 of us. And I have a cousin who lives in Chicago, and it came from such a great place. But we're all in this big text message. They're like, hey, it's getting expensive, and food at restaurants isn't that great, even if you spend a lot. So somebody should host us at their house. And I messaged my brother. I go, what? He's in Chicago. Other cousins are in North Carolina. The other ones are on the other side. Somebody is only you or I, and I'm not doing it, so it's you. Somebody. So that's where I do in work. Is somebody should go do this thing, and then you just sip coffee and sit back.
In the military, if you ever did that out loud, Chief would turn around and be like, "Thank you for volunteering," and you would now be responsible for it.
Would that just like completely decimate like any idea, like brainstorming, where it's like, okay, I'm just not going to share anything ever more?
Yeah.
Because...
Well, yeah. Do you know what? Do you not know what Navy stands for? NAVY.
No.
Never again volunteer yourself.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, you never have ideas. Don't be an individual. Individuals are not welcome in the military.
So let's dive into the topic. And because like I think there's a few pieces here which I think we could use as diving off points. I think the two I would want to jump into, one is like the constant stress of always trying to break things. But the one which actually connected to me when we were brainstorming ideas was learning to disconnect and avoid always being in hacker mode.
Oh, buddy, that's an interesting one because we've talked about this before in terms of just burnout in general because, we work, I guess, intellectual jobs. I mean, I guess you work an intellectual job. I pretend to be whatever it is that I am. But no, we've said that like we do our jobs in the shower and while we're laying in bed and we're thinking through problems. And like, I've definitely had nights where I've literally solved coding problems in my sleep and woke up and said, oh yeah, like, how do you prevent yourself from doing that? So anyway, you're going to give me the answer to that, right? Because I don't have an answer to that question.
I was sitting here ready to take notes. I mean, I think it goes in some ways counter to something, not counter. It is, I've said before, I think hacker is not I think it's something you are. Like you become, like you embody the hacker spirit and whatnot. And it is what you do. You love curiosity. You throw it at your hobbies. It doesn't matter if it's coffee and you go, okay, I want to learn this thing. I want to figure it out. I want to master this thing. And it's that constant curiosity. So I don't think you can turn, you have the ability to turn that off. You're going to apply that same curiosity to everything. I think
I,
the piece that's hard is when that is something you are and then something you do for your job, those worlds kind of start overlapping. And that's where I think the problem starts happening, when there's not a good way of having a clear line of separation between here's the stuff I'm doing for work and here's the stuff I'm doing for on the personal side.
I think if you ever actually like once you are imbued as a hacker, if you will, I don't think you ever actually successfully turn it off. And if you do successfully turn it off, I think you get a visit from the ghost of hacker spirit, like a Christmas Carol, and it drags you back into the deep, dark depths of whatever you were working on previously. And so there's no escape.
I think that for me, oftentimes my hobbies, and I guess I kind of see this multiple times in hobbies I've done, like coffee. Let's use an example. I got into coffee, enjoy coffee. I think like most hackers, typically coffee. If you're a tea person, you're dead to me. But you can have, so I get a roaster. I enjoy tea every once in a while. It's fine. Coffee's better.
I drink both, so I'm half dead to you. I got it.
But I
Which half?
wanted
Upper half or bottom half? He's got to think about that one.
but I wanted to get coffee roasting. I wanted a bigger roaster, and the big roasters they're really expensive. They're like like $7,000-8,000. So I ended up like selling coffee, working with different cafes nearby, saying, hey, and sell it to you, and blah blah blah, and use that hobby as a way of fostering my habit. So it started as a passion, quickly turned into a business, which then ended up like paying for the roaster. But then the passion kind of left a little bit. Then I had to pull away from it. I think kind of the same thing happens in hacking for me, is like I wanted to learn to program to solve this issue at work. And then I'm working in my free time to necessarily do this thing at work. And I think like one of the problems in our industry more than other ones is that our hobbies tend to intermix with work really fast. Like using example of home lab. It's not like someone has a plumbing degree and they're like, okay, I'm going to go have a plumbing lab in my house. It's like, I'm going to go spin up servers and dork around on electronics.
Although like, my brother's an electrician. I'm pretty sure he views his house as his lab. Like his house will be perfectly wired whenever he gets around to it. Just like our labs, will be perfect for running whatever scenario we want to run whenever we get around to it.
Whenever we have time for it. I have an employee, I guess, who has he has like a bunch of firewalls underneath his desk, and he's been talking about them a lot. He goes like, I have these, and I have to get them set up, and I have these, and I get set up. I'm like, when are you going to dedicate the time to it, or just take work hours and go figure that one out?
So this is an interesting question. Like, let's talk about the acquisition of stuff in this regard. Like, talk about turning off hacker mode. I think there's two types of hackers, really. There are people that acquire stuff and then like never fully set them up, or are always in the process of setting new stuff up, and stuff is coming and going consistently because they're always working on new things. And then there are people, and I'm probably one of those people, that like when I get a phone, I will run that phone to death before I get a new phone. And I will spend 3 years complaining about how shitty this phone is before I finally am like, all right, it's time to get a new phone, because I fear spending 4 hours resetting things up and relearning the interface more than I do having to deal with an additional 1 to 2 minutes of annoyance every day or something like that.
Reset up all your two-factor.
Yeah. Oh God. No. Why did you have to say that? So, all right, a little bit of background. This morning, I literally, as I was walking out of the bedroom, I was checking something on my phone, and I don't remember what I was doing, but I fumbled it. And for the first time in my life, I have cracked a screen on a phone. I straight up dropped my phone out of my hands and watched it just go bonk, bonk, bonk down the stairs. And I was looking at the top of the stairs, and I just had a big sigh of just, that one definitely did it in. I've dropped this phone so many times. I think it's like 5 years old now, and I've been complaining. It doesn't charge right. So I got to find the right cable, otherwise it
Oh
won't
goodness.
charge. And it's just it's like a USB-C cable. It was like one of the first USB-C phones, and now like if I don't have the perfect fit, it doesn't quite charge, and it's been like that for a year and a half. And my
Do you
wife,
run?
God bless her, has dealt with this.
Do
Me
you
complaining
run
about.
naked with your phone, or do you have a case? Like I run
Uh,
naked. I got no case on my phone.
I have a very slim case on the outside because it's so slick. I
Okay,
just need the extra grip, and that's it. And my hands are so soft, so
so delicate.
things just fly out of my hands. But anyway,
I
so finally today, I was staring at my phone on the ground, going, I guess I'm gonna have to reset up two fac. Like I dread that process so much that I will delay getting a new everyday carry or everyday laptop or whatever for probably 4 or 5 years past when I should. Are you that type of person, or are you a it's every 2 years type person?
uh I am. I would say I have mostly Apple ecosystem. There's a couple different reasons I have Apple ecosystems. I wasn't like I didn't grow up an Apple fanboy. I have become one mainly for two reasons. One, moving from one device to another is stupidly easy. Like going from a one Windows system to another Windows system is a giant pain in the butt. For a Mac, it's like time machine backup, recovery, everything's there. Same thing with between Macs, between phones. It is stupidly easy to move between phones. But
I will say Windows is just as easy now.
oh, is
It
it?
took a long time to get there, but it is. Yeah, OneDrive does the thing now.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Like I have OneDrive. I haven't done it on to move between computers, but like
yeah.
all my settings, even two factor, like there is some exceptions, but like if your two factor tokens are stored in like a one password, they're fine. Or you have either way that though that's the transition word. But to answer your question, no, I do every 2 years, and then I'll find a phone where I'm like, okay, I like this one, and then it will be like 4 or 5, 6 years until like the next transition. Apple tends to do like every 4 years there's an actual change, and every other year it's a
Yeah.
minor change. So it'll typically be like, okay, 4 years, it's not another major change. Okay, I'll wait another 2 years, and it's like 6 years.
So I bring this up because I think there is something to be said about the ability to disconnect from hacker mode and that type of trait. And I think the people who are used to bringing new stuff in rapidly, using it, putting it aside, getting new stuff, I think they're more likely to struggle. And this is just observation. They're more likely to struggle with being able to turn it off because there's a lot of tinkering you have to do to set up a new environment, right? And if you enjoy that tinkering, then you'll be going through the process a lot quicker and a lot more enjoyfully. Like I hate it, and so I actively push it away outside of anything that isn't work. And so I think it's a little easier for me to disconnect, but it's still crazy. Like it's I was just talking to a buddy of mine when I used to live in an apartment. He worked at the front desk and he used to come down and say, "Hey, the automatic locks on our doors, those aren't secure, right?" And he'd be like, "Why'd you have to tell me this?" Yeah, like I'm like, "Yeah, like there's a little USB thing on the side, and I'm pretty sure if I, spent a day, I could figure out how to pop all the locks into the entire building." And he's like, "Could you put this in writing and send that to management?" Because
I have a question.
the reason why there's a USB on the outside is they have a tool that lets them do that for sure.
Oh goodness. You said like you don't like setting up a new environment. You don't like necessarily tinkering with it. Did you ever at one time, like when you first started,
No,
really?
no, never.
So
I'm like the antithesis of a typical hacker, I think, especially one that attends DEF CON and does things.
yeah, again, unique snowflake in a blizzard of snowflakes.
Yeah.
I think for me, I had a lot of that. I enjoyed getting a new computer, of course. Like I got a new computer, I'd set it up, it was fun. Got a new device, set it up, have fun with it. But the thing is, I've gotten older, I've gotten like less excited about those things and more excited about other things. And I think that's one of the transitions, at least for myself, that's happened is like I'm less interested in the technology and more interested in what I can do with it. And I think that's
Okay.
maybe
So
a maturing thing, but
what drives you insane though? Like for
like,
me, all of that tinkering really does drive me insane.
I think I wanted to, there's two things I wanted to say on the phone. One, I wanted to go down the route of company phone. Like that one is an interesting one, and that does drive me insane. So when I was at like General Electric, you had to have a company phone, which was just so silly because it was like, okay, well, that's so you can reach me outside of work. No. Like there's no, you're not paying me enough for that. And that's not nearly part of our contract. So you start going like, all right, company, like either way, the company phone one. But what drives me nuts with new technology is like, all the simple things like, oh, when things don't work the way they should, or those like Teams, holy crow, Microsoft Teams, you suck this past month. Where it's like, it's just like,
It's just Skype.
I always laugh. I go, it's like, I go, this is progress. There is a phrase we use consistently at work, which is, this is progress. This is progress. I remember when we were getting conference bridges and we could have this whole thing wrapped up in 7 minutes, but we have now been dicking with Teams for the next 20 minutes and we still can't talk right and finally just call each other. So like, I think the things which get me most frustrated is, especially as a consultant, that I have to have all these freaking different pieces of collaboration software and whatnot. And somehow we haven't learned how to universally collaborate because I need Teams and Slack and Google Chat and this.
You want to talk about a descent into madness? This is the perfect thing we can really drive into. The number of communication platforms that hackers use in particular is actually like, I would beg and plead for everyone to just go back to IRC for the love of God. I know it's not secure. We can make it secure. It's fine. But like, good God, I have every messaging mechanism. And then like when everyone got excited about the Fediverse and when Twitter imploded or whatever, and everyone tried to go to Mastodon so they could toot instead. I tried to set up on Mastodon once and I was like, I don't get it. I mean, I get it, but why? But why?
Yeah, it is. I think that's one of the biggest struggles right now, personally. I think there's two struggles I would love to talk about. Like one of the big ones is we have a zillion options, which is great for communication, but the community is remarkably fragmented. Like there are like, oh, I can go to like, and then anytime you get a good one, it gets overrun by some, like there's a whole category get overrun by loud people because there's a whole category of hacker you didn't even talk about, whether you want to call them a hacker or not, is the ones who buy new projects and start tinkering with them, the ones who like get them and then don't have the time to set it up because their priorities are other ones. And then there's the whole other category who don't do anything but talk about all the things they want to do.
Oh gosh.
And that group
I
are the ones who tend to be the loudest.
I probably fall a little bit into that category, but that said, all right, let's like, for me, where the insanity really started, and I'll say like where the madness, if you will, really opened up when I started doing kernel development, and I started doing, and by kernel, I mean like real-time kernels on badges, being able to run processes and like accept. Basically, like an ESP32 runs an embedded kernel. It's real time because it has to do signal processing, a whole bunch of other things. And there's a lot of constraints there that are hard to deal with and limited memory. When you look at that and you actually execute something, you get all working, you do something fancy, even implemented some like hacking challenges on it where you could exploit the board and all that stuff. And then you have an idea for a project, and I'll give you one. I've always wanted to dive into maybe making a vocoder for myself, and especially designed one. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but especially designed one that I can use if I were to play music on stage. And that one is like a pure physical mechanism. There isn't any signal process. There isn't a chip on that board that does anything other than maybe a chip that modulates the vocals coming in and sends it out another thing. And there's a point in technical maturity, I don't know, when you just have enough background and stuff that you can look at the project, break it down in your head, see all the steps that you would have to take to get there. And that mental exercise of just going through how would I accomplish that is enough to scratch that technical itch that you just never do it. So there's probably like 30 or 40 projects that I have sat down and like mapped out. If I were going to do this, how would I do it? And I have it mapped out sometimes on paper, and I go, okay, I'm good. I'm bored by this now. Like I could do this if I wanted, but I don't. I don't want to. It's just like that. That I feel is an absolute form of madness, because it's like I go through the process of planning out a whole project. I see what it would cost. I see what it would take. I start doing a little bit of the work, and I'm just like, I'm bored by this now. Next.
I think the thing that drives me massively insane, especially when it comes to like the pen testing and all that side of things, when I was focused on that, is the sheer amount of contradictions that exist within the field. Before I jump into that, Braden is hi, welcome to the stream. He had mentioned just saying the things that drives him crazy, or the things, having to tinker with things that should just work. You buy a 3D printer that should just do what it needs to do without much tinkering, and then have to legitimately dork with the thing for hours just to get it to print a single device.
So this is a good example. Like when I'm working on Linux, it's an open source, volunteer functionally made project. I accept that I will have to tinker with it, but I do that professionally. My phone better just freaking work. Yeah, that's like the two dichotomies, right?
Yeah, the sheer amount of contradictions I always had to deal with is, as a consultant, you're a third party. You are interacting with them to accomplish their goals. And you have like let's use a pen test. They want to hire you to do a pen test, and now you have to do this weird contradiction with going, do they need a pen test to check a box in order to use a third party? So like I'm hitting your message right now. No,
it's fine.
All right. What will happen is you go, I have to now balance this. Lost my train of thought. Here we go. I have to now balance their need is that I need to check a box to accomplish this pen test because this other client they have requires it. Or I actually care about security and I need you to find all of these things. So both of them, you're going to find all the things. Just one, you're now going to have to balance it with, I need them to get it fixed. I need to get a clear report. So this whole balancing act of going like, what are the things you're saying? Now, what are all the things you're not saying? So there's that. I think the other thing, which is a massive, this is one of the things that started to break me at a certain point, especially when you're doing these tests week after week after week, is if you find a critical vulnerability in, let's say, a web app, that's a very, very well job done. That was a POW. They used to give what was called POW bonuses out when you found a critical vulnerability. What's weird about this when you think about it is you have zero ability to impact whether or not a critical vulnerability exists in the app. There may be one there and you don't find it, or they may be really good. So there's this weird thing of going, the better I do in breaking the app, the worse they look. So my own client is now wishing that I fail in some ways, if you think about that. So
there are definitely reverse incentives as a hacker in a lot of cases.
So the worse I do...
It's actually... Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go for it.
I was going to say, it's actually an interesting observation because we've said this before. A lot of hacking is quintessentially antisocial. Your job is to break things instead of make things. There are not many jobs in society that your job is to break things. And by definition, you will make someone upset. You are creating work for somebody anytime you succeed.
Yeah.
And so like that is why in some senses people would look at hackers as just an antisocial brand in general, simply because that what you do creates problems for people. It's like working for the Wildlife and Fishery Service. I have a friend that used to work for the Wildlife and Fishery Service who would be responsible for going on boats that were fishing and monitoring them while they fish to make sure they weren't overfishing or pulling up fish they weren't supposed to, or all these things. And so they were there to enforce compliance. And that means everyone on the boat hated them, right? Because they had to be on their best behavior and all those things, modify but they're really there, like the Wildlife and Fisheries Service is really there to help ensure that those people continue to have a job for the foreseeable future, because they're enforcing not overfishing, so the fish stocks don't go down so much that these people don't have jobs, right? Like we're trying to actually make it so that we can live in this ecosystem and have it work. But it's kind of the same thing. That person is there to create, not necessarily create problems, but that's the way it's perceived. And that's basically what a hacker is. You're being hired to create problems for people, which is like,
and then
you better like it because,
Oh, and it gets so much worse too, because you might be hired by the security team to then test someone else's app within the organization. So now it goes, one, you might be dealing with politics between them, and now them and you, and that you have to make sure they're happy because they want to find something, but they don't want to find something, and it starts going insane. You start going insane. You're like, and then you just break it down. You're like, all right, my job is just to find things. That's all I care about. I'm going to find things. I'm going to deliver them. I don't care. And you start disconnecting yourself. Yeah. And that one is the best. That's where I would say you get maturity of analysis without opinion in there. But here's again, it goes back to the, if I don't find anything, somehow all of a sudden my manager might look at me like, that wasn't a good test. You didn't do a good job on that one. It's like, I can't control whether or not there's vulnerabilities there.
Yeah, or you must not be a good hacker, right? Like that's such a what a maddening cycle, at least a professional cycle. And I've always experienced this to some extent. Like the way I've always thought about bug hunting is that it's fundamentally research, and you should get paid to do research, not paid to find stuff. Because you're not guaranteed to find anything. Right. So your product is, here is what I researched and here's what I found, regardless of whether or not there is something in there. That's what you're being paid for in some sense. But then, as you said, there's reverse incentives built into like every step of the process, such that like, I don't know, let's talk about scope creep. There are areas of hacking where like, I know if I go down this route, I will not find something. I'll be able to say that there is a security concern here. But the problem is, it's just like reading. There's a really good paper called by Mickens called The Night Watch, and maybe it was The Night Watch or maybe it was one of his other ones. But he actually derides security researcher research papers, because there's always a laundry list of like, in this particular context, on this particular machine, on this particular month when the moon is high in the sky, we can exploit this thing that is, pseudo random. And it's just not realistic, right? It's like, yeah, there's a bug there, but it is not necessarily or not easily exploitable. But you still have to report it. And to some extent, the longer you do this, there are certain avenues you could go down to find those things. And like, that's a descent into madness too, because you're like, how much do I want to do this knowing it's complete bullshit for just to be able to show that I found something, versus like just be able to say this is reasonably secure, right?
So I've had one of these vulnerabilities. Well, we all have, but I've had one of those ones where it is a critical vulnerability. Like it was an out flat buffer overflow in a URL. Like you could actually do remote code execution within a URL, but it worked about a third of the time. But it was so inconsistent, and then it went away for a while, and then it came back, and we're trying to figure out how to report it. And oh gosh, it was like, you reported it saying this is what it is. They looked at the code. There's no way that could possibly happen. There was a vulnerability at one point, but it doesn't exist anymore. And it was like weeks, months of going back and forth with them. And finally we just said, we'll put it in the report as informational because we will come across it. Sure enough, it was like a cached Docker container that was cached in one of the systems, which never got purged. And at a certain point, that Docker container was getting pushed into their balance. And it was only at like high capacity moments where what would happen is we would have DAS scanners running, which would scale their environment to the point where this container got pulled in. Oh, it was just like
That's awesome.
maddening. And
Yeah,
luckily,
I instantly would have thought there's a versioning issue and there's somebody out there that is just using an old copy.
and the kicker though was it wasn't their code. It was a third party of theirs code. So they're working with a team in India who's trying to they're trying to language communicators and language barriers and all of that. That one was super frustrating. But the other one is you're doing a pen test, and then as you mentioned the curiosity aspect. If you're doing a pen test, sometimes you get that sixth sense of like there is something here, and you have to balance. I need to wrap this test up, but also I need to follow my curiosity here, which may cause a giant amount of scope creep. And we've had to do that where it's like, all right, there's something there. We need to spend another week dorking around with this, and then you come nowhere. Like, but you go, at least we exhausted the possibility. But balancing the curiosity with actually getting the test done that's another just descent into madness.
Yeah. I mean, given infinite time and infinite resources, you could do infinite testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there will always be more curiosities. Yeah. What was I going to say? I don't remember. That train has sailed.
I mean, the other piece here too is like, especially within pen testing, there is such a difficult balance of at what point does it feel like you're cheating. And I use this as an example, like
if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Like, and that's the thing is you always have these pieces of information that you not necessarily would have, but given enough time. For instance, like, oh, they use Beyond Trust, or oh, they use like a secret server, or they use Thycotic, which is like, we'll call it like a one password internally, like that they use, like they would use for their corporate systems. You can do more than a one password, like in reset local admins and whatnot. But like you go, okay, I know they need that, so that holds the keys to the kingdom. I should go focus on that. Well, I know, like, the other piece of this, which is is so oftentimes the biggest insecurities in giant enterprise, you know who they're with? It's with two groups. One, the security team.
Admin. Yeah, the security team and the admins.
The security team that does all the work, or the IT administrators who do all the work, need a significant amount of access. One of your jobs as a tester is to escalate up to an admin. So the people you tend to the final exploit that gives all the access is hitting popping an admin, especially if it's in the security team or it's in the same group. That's all like executives will see. They'll just see the last step and be like, oh, it's that person's fault. Let's fire them or something.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with that piece. The other one is developers. Is the development networks are pretty open because like their CIC, like their Jenkins servers and all of that, which to build all this infrastructure is pretty wide open.
You need root in a lot of cases to be able to install development packages, right? So like I've been in an environment where you don't get root and you're like, oh, I need to install this package, and then it's like a multi-week effort, and so that's why developer networks tend to be very open.
So all of a sudden now, what are the two groups I'm trying to keep happy? What are the two groups that typically get the brunt of it?
They're the targets, yeah. I mean, it's an amazing, like, I get this all the time. Even amongst people who should know better will continue to say things like engineers are not social, or like not socially well adapted, or not well adjusted. However you want to put it. They view engineers in some sense as incapable of interacting with general society. But everything you just described is a highly social problem. Yeah. Right? It's not largely a technical problem. It's a matter of communicating effectively across different groups of engineers, but also executives and other people. And like, what a maddening environment that is, where one group of people wants to constantly tell you, I can't put you in front of an executive because you have no social skills. Meanwhile, on the back end, you're having to manage all these complex social interactions amongst teams that hate you but need you, and all of these things. It's a very, and then people are like, "Oh, your job is all math and math and science." It's like, no, actually, it's a lot of talking to people.
Here's the other kicker, though. So you develop those skills. You are good at communicating with executives. You're good at leading a team. What are you asked to do next?
Oh yeah, you go into a leadership role, which is the death of hacking.
There we go.
Oh goodness. Yeah, did we just like tie up the entire industry into a bow, right?
Yeah. And how does that
Like
not
that
lead to
that
burnout? Like how does that
I
actually
mean
gets
it
me frustrated?
does.
How does it not lead to burnout when you're pulled out of the technical space, you're pulled away from the thing that got you interested in the first place, and now it's like, oh, you're a good communicator. This is your only direction. There's no technical track at most companies. I mean, some are developing it, but your only direction to more money, more career, more that is, and now you're on the leadership track.
Now that said, like and you brought this up, like I do think there is you could be a technical leader, right? And develop people. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a manager where you actively manage them. And I think eventually, if you want to actually progress technically in a technical role, you do have to develop that skill of developing other people because you become a force multiplier, right? I'm one Gourry, right? If you ask me to go find more Gowries, I can't do it. I can make you one. It might take a while, right? Like I can take a fledgling hacker from right out of college and give me 5 years. I can help develop the skills to recreate a Gourry, but it's going to take a while, and it's not going to involve me being their manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is two completely different things, right? Like you need unfettered tinker time and the ability to just like go deep on certain topics and not have to deal with the administrative bullshit of it. Um, but you're definitely pushed towards like as soon as you show an inkling of that leadership, you're like, all right, cool, you're a manager now. No, that's not. It's not the way to do things.
Yeah, the other piece of this, which is a really, I've noticed this with a few people I talk to who are looking to build like personal brands, we'll say, is you're in some ways obligated as a technical person to create a personal brand. Personal brand is
Yeah,
probably a fancier word for it, but if you're like one of the things I say for like junior pen testers, the best thing you can do for your career is stand up a personal website, like yourname.com or something close to it, or your handle if you want to. Start a blog, start writing up show your work. Like there's a great book by Austin Kleon, which is like short. If anyone, as it said, it's like you read it while you're pooping. And it's about showing your work. Like show your work, steal like an artist. Like there's nothing new under the sun, but show your work is effectively like, some of the best YouTube channels. Best YouTube channels you find are not like experts in the field. They're ones who are kind of like on the learning phase. They're learning at the same pace. There was like a whole study in Europe done that the best way to learn, or one of the best ways to learn, wasn't from a professor who's been doing it for 20 years because they forgot what being a beginner
yeah.
is. It's a student who's like 2 years ahead of you. So you have to now hone this personal website and this brand, and you have to show your work. And then you have someone who's looking to interview you. You can show it. It's better than a resume because it shows that you know what you're doing, or it gives a better demonstration than a technical interview, which are very, very hard to do within like pen testing. So you're now responsible for all this extra work, and now you have to balance that with everything else. But the hardest part of it is you have two types of hackers, maybe three. We'll use the example you have. You have one who doesn't do a lot of things, but say they do a lot of things. Don't want to hire that person because they have no idea what they're doing. They're just the arrogant jerk who sits in the corner. The second one is the one who actually does all the things, but doesn't want to share them, either because of imposter syndrome, doesn't want to share them because they don't think they're smart enough, doesn't want to show them because they don't care about those things, like just cares about learning. They won't, it's much harder for that individual to succeed in the field because you need a little bit, you have to have this really hard balance of, I need to be not arrogant enough. I need to show my skills in a way that demonstrates it. And again, this may be a consultant thing. This may be a consulting, like, because you have to play this balance of like every once in a while I need to flex up and show my skills. But like, I think it exists in everywhere. Like any part of your career, you still have to like, here are all the things I'm really good at and I'm awesome at, and you should hire me because here's the things. And that's a hard balance to maintain, especially like going to DEF CON or things like that and saying, here's all the things I know better than anyone else.
I sum that up as eventually you have to have an opinion, right? Like if you don't have an opinion, if you're willing to, you can state the
Mm-hmm.
facts and you can show data, but when somebody goes, so what? Like that's the so what is the actual question that matters. And it's so funny to talk about this in the it's I hadn't thought about this topic in the descent into madness that is hacking until now, that I realized that like there's so much of this field that is fundamentally social, but it's sold to us in such a technical focused way of like, you need to know all these hacking primitives, you need to have buffer overflows and web exploitation, cross-site scripting, and all of these things, and all of those things matter, but that's maybe like 30 or 40% of the job, right? If that. All the other things, like if you really want to progress, is all of these extra things that no one develops people to have: social skills, understanding complex organizations. That'll just make you a better hacker in general. If you understand that, like, for example, the IT organization has a squishy inside, and if you can pop them, you can pop the whole company. Like, that's something you get. Like, if you go in and you're doing an assessment, understanding the social realities of the company is actually very important, because it'll tell you, like, oh, there's a disgruntled employee over here. We might be able to, or there's a whole disconnect between these two departments. I might be able to exploit sending someone an invoice, which is like a non-technical hack, right? And we've talked about that before. But it's such a maddening. I think DEF CON does a decent job of focusing on that social exploitation side, but not necessarily the leveraging the same skills to be effective as a hacker, which is like when you I'm synthesizing this thought as I go. So like I'm a little scatterbrained at the moment, but that reality of what you're being asked to do versus, I would say, what your typical engineer at a typical company is being asked to do, which is develop a solution to solve this particular problem, go do research, and it's relatively well defined, but has some of these social interactions across teams still. There's some crossover, but the hacker with the goal of going in and their fundamental role is to break things, being as antisocial as it gets, is such a maddening complication to that environment that it's, yeah, of course it would drive burnout, because you're expected to have all these extra skills and become, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, but also a master of some. So jack of all trades and a master of some, but then also be able to navigate all of those complex. I don't know. This is like, yeah, I hadn't really worked through this problem before, but we've been thinking about it a while in some sense. The job of being a hacker, or the lifestyle of being a hacker, is opting into a rather maddening environment.
The other piece, have you looked at a job posting? Like, and I know this is like, I mean, like, when was the last
Forever
time?
ago.
In like some of the job postings, like recently, I'm seeing, and it's looking at people looking at hiring, we're hiring, things like that. Usually, like, it's funny. All of our hires we've done have all been like word of mouth or someone reaching out. I think still the funniest person we hired was like the person who's like, "Hey, I watched your YouTube video. Can you interview me?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" Like that one was super weird. I ended up hiring him, but the is some of the job postings are insane. Like they're crazy. They're like, you need. I still think the funniest one was like, you need. This one was posted online. I forgot who did this one. It was Primogen. You need 8 years of like Next.js experience, and the language had only been around 3 years. And it was like things like crazy things like that. But it's like you need managerial skills and full knowledge of all the compliance frameworks, and also pen testing skills, and also development skills, and also this like it would be the same as saying, I need plumbing skills, I need electrician skills, I need stone masonry work, and I need to be full time. Oh gosh,
oh my gosh.
Woodworker.
Okay,
but,
so fun. This is fun. All right, so let's pick on a particular company. I'm gonna pick on CrowdStrike because
perfect.
there's honestly first company that popped up when I just Googled a listing, and I'm kind of chuckling because exactly. So here's what you'll do. You'll join a project team working on product improvement, blah, blah, security, create and update threat models, read and review source code for applications looking for security flaws and vulnerabilities. Think like a hacker and attack endpoint applications with kernel components, mostly before they go into production. Oh, look, that they're hiring the person they should have hired 2 years ago before they fucked it all up. Work with developers to help them understand problems, risks, design weaknesses, build small tools and automation to make your life, your team's life, and developers' lives easier. Validate and replicate some kinds of bug bounty reports and hunt for similar issues. And here's what you'll need: experiencing programming and assessing C/C++ apps for Windows, Linux, or Mac, understanding of system internals and security features of Windows, Linux, or Mac. Like, those two things are pretty standard, I think. Comfort with concurrency considerations in multi-threaded applications. Okay, now we're getting a little outside of, like, people spend their entire careers optimizing that space, but okay, I'll give it to you. If you're doing C++, you probably have some understanding of it. Understand the security implications of containerization and virtualization. People spend their entire careers working in that space in particular. A working understanding of how software products are created and shipped in agile/DevOps like environments. So now you need to not just be an application security engineer. You now need to be a professional engineer who is completely familiar with the building side and DevOps and agile development, enough to have a positive working relationship with product engineers, a solid understanding of common software weaknesses. Yeah, that's fine. Comfort with collaborating across technical teams and blah, blah, the social things. And then the bonus points are like experience with debuggers and decompilers, experience developing and maintaining automation, developing and using threat models, like, I get, like, they're hiring this person. This is a senior engineer. So granted, but like, what their definition of a senior engineer here is probably somebody with 20 years of experience.
and then on top of that, you get the job, and then you won't do any of those things because they go, oh, you know how to communicate. We're going to have you be the compliance framework lead.
Well, no, the best part about this, I actually think the best part about this, and like, I'll just say that they post their base salary range for this position, and it's like 135 to 215. So the range. Starting range is 135. Like, they're hoping to get somebody who has, we'll say, 50% of these skills for 135 and like 75% of these skills at like 215. But the person they're looking for is somebody that almost by definition has to have had like at least 12, maybe 15 years of experience to just to be able to acquire most of what they're talking about and be able to come in and hit the ground running in order to hit that top range. And I would say that top range is low.
The other piece of this is what kind of person is going to take this job, because in not so distant future, the timing gets a little screwy in people's heads of when certain things happen. And imagine having CrowdStrike on your resume for the time period in which the giant chaos happened, because it will get lost. It will be like, oh, it was sometime around that. And if you move on from CrowdStrike, you absolutely will somehow be blamed further in your career going, oh, that was probably the person responsible for that.
That's tough. And like, you know, we're picking on CrowdStrike because they happen to be the first one that, and like,
had the biggest incident in the history of everything.
Like Praxis, like everyone's up here with similar. Some of these are not completely unreasonable. That one is just like we messed up and we need all of these people type posting. Oh man, this other one that's like mid-level reverse engineer. The list on this one is like, it's really long. It's really long.
Can you find a pen test one? Like if there is like a red team or pen test one, because that one, if you see anything, I guarantee it's going to be like something about compliance frameworks, like good familiarity with high trust, HIPAA, ISO, NIST, cybersecurity framework, like all of that stuff. And also, like, you know, GDPR, and then all the testing, and then also DevOps and also cloud infrastructure and also containerization and also OWASP and exploitation. But they're expanded from you need to know all of this. And then on the other side, they're also like kernel exploitation, reverse engineering, advanced programming. Like it is all over the place.
This first one's not too bad. I clicked on the junior pen tester and they're like, yeah, knowledge of OWASP Pop 10. Yeah, that's that's fine for a junior. I like junior pen tester, 3 to 5 years of experience in the IT field. I guess is that like, do you I think that's hilarious. Do you include like a degree substituting for the 3 to 5 years of experience, or is it degree plus 3 to 5? Because if it's degree plus 3 to 5, you can get out of here with that.
It would have to be degree plus. It'd have to be though,
because for a junior position.
Hold on. This is, would I hire them or would a company hire them? Because a company will say you need a degree plus the experience
for a junior position.
For a junior at an enterprise, they will say you need a degree plus experience.
Legitimately absurd.
Legitimately. It is. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that is what is expected at a large enterprise. I mean, my favorite stories are the guys who just did an interview. I just think of all the people we've hired as going like, oh, this person, I didn't ask for the degree. It was like, what do you do? What is your, and again, he goes like, here's my personal website. Here's all the projects I did. I was like, oh, okay, that's awesome. Let's do this. I mean, because I'm not going to force someone through. The weirdest one with a lot of these interviews is like, that's the other thing is like, is there any standardization around when you've applied for positions? Has it mostly been some standardization, like LeetCode code or something like that?
I'm a bad person to ask. I don't openly apply for positions.
Early in your career, was there any standardization around it?
Again, even earlier in my career, I did not apply to positions. I got my job through people.
I mean, that's probably true of.
Eventually,
successful. For a lot of it is it's the relationships. I'm just thinking about when way back when I was trying to get back to Michigan when I was in Pennsylvania, the interview process was just all over the map. Some of them did technical interviews. Other ones would you jump into labs and stuff like that. Especially it was before everyone's looking at how in the world you test pen testers because it's such a weird skill set because it's everything from what you're focusing on. You can be web centric, you can be app, but it also shifts. Like that's the other thing you want to talk about the descent into insanity is the sheer amount of skill turnover you need in the industry. When I started, it was like ThickNet clients were all over the place. You had a .NET ThickNet, which had some weird proprietary protocol of how it communicated to the backend. Now, you won't find a thick client almost anywhere unless it's within SCADA systems.
We were definitely talking about this previously, like the skill acquisition process. I don't play CTFs anymore, and I said this to a friend of mine who rightfully called me out, but. She was just like, oh, you playing in the CTF? And I was like, nah, that's a young man's game. And she went, excuse me? And I went, you're right. It's a young person's game. I was like, it's a young person's game because I have always felt that we've talked about this, the inflation of CTFs and do they have to progressively get harder? We had an interview with the DEF CON CTF runners where we asked about that. Is there a sense of you're running it this year, we have to outdo last year's team, or is it we're just trying to put on a good game? And they're like, there is some of that pressure, but we try not to think about it because otherwise it doesn't become, it's a game, right? Like it's not a good game if you do that. So you try to design a good game first. And we experienced this on Darknet. Like our goal was to teach, which meant that our goal is not to stump the chump explicitly. It's to design a good experience first. And so the thought here was basically like the skill acquisition process. When I fell out of CTF is when I realized that I wasn't gaining new useful knowledge. I was gaining particular knowledge about a particular execution or exploitation pattern, which can be useful if all I'm doing all day is looking for that. and being able to recognize those patterns. But by and large, the work has been going in a different direction in the sense of your average reverse engineer and bug hunter is writing more automated testing systems rather than digging through individual binaries. Like by the time you're digging through an individual binary, you probably already identified something exists.
I would say it's completely different skill sets from CTFs to bug bounty to I pen test. I'll say like corporate pen testing. Very very different skill sets and very different challenges. I do it. I haven't done any recently. I did a lot of CTFs, and a lot of them, everything from the Jeopardy style to the attack defense. The attack defense I didn't do too many of, but it does go to the designers of the CTF tend to follow their own skill set. Let's use an example. Hack Fortress at DEF CON, one of my favorite contests. They had this whole string of, they call them easy forensics challenges, but forensics is not like a skill that most people have. Like it's not really needed. Did I lag out? My screen froze.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so I'll just keep talking and maybe eventually it will work. One of the skill for the forensics part of it is they didn't like. It's not like one you typically would have on your test. I'm not gonna reset it. I'll see if I can bumble my way through. But when that person was on the team, they had those challenges. When they left the team, they stopped doing those challenges. But when you're doing your, I think, skill acquisition, like because even bug bounty, what you typically do is find one vulnerability and then go across all the bug bounty clients looking for that same vulnerability across all of them. And then pen testing is kind of like what technologies do they have in Flip. Let's see if I can reset this thing while you're talking.
Yeah, right. So it is the skill sets are different for sure. I would agree with that, but the process and the skill acquisition part is somewhat the same, right? As you bring on a new client and you are assessing that new client, there's a whole new set of frameworks that you got to dig into. And so trying to assess a pen tester on, do you know some set of frameworks is pointless because they're probably not going to run into that one. Maybe we'll take Django. Like, do you know Django? Because you'll have to assess Django. And then you go to your next, the next company and they're like, oh, this whole thing's built off of Fast API and it's a new API and they've never seen Fast API before, right? Like it's more about how quickly can you acquire new skills than it is about, are you good at actually using these things to build something and understanding the fundamentals of it? Which is a particularly, like, I have to imagine is a little maddening simply because you're being tested on how well you can learn. And like, how do you assess how well someone can learn in a 45-minute interview?
I mean, in some ways, I almost say that was one of my favorite I mean, this was all right. CTF, DEF CON, Middle Indian. Do you remember this one? This was insane. So
Middle Indian? Yeah.
Yeah. Little Indian, Big Indian, they made a Middle Indian. So every tool is effectively obsolete. When I first heard that one, it's like, okay, it's a stump the chump. It felt like a stump the chump. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, oh, but you have to effectively learn a custom architecture and then create almost like bridges between all the tools.
It was Middle Indian, and also they had 9-bit bytes. So I think they called them knights. And so, yeah, it was a custom architecture, but then like within a day, people had written LLVM lifters to recompile it into like x86. So like, but that's a good example of like, if you know what to do, the problem is not that hard. And if you don't know what to do, you're done.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Or like you'll spend your entire CTF trying to solve problem number 1 and not get anywhere else into the CTF. And so like I was going to say, like, this is a good example of like, yeah, you want to hire a qualified team, but then how do you create a new qualified team is by throwing a couple $1 million into a black hole and then hoping you get qualified individuals out.
I would say it's always interesting to see the amount of time. I almost feel like there has to be a metric kept for CTFs, like time till first point, because some of them are hilarious. Like NSEC was like 4 hours, and then it was like first point. And it was like, I imagine on that one, it was the same thing. It was like no time for like a really long time to first point, and then the team takes off.
Yeah.
With that,
that's a good one.
What do you got? What are your closing thoughts? Merry Christmas, by the way. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays. This is a bit of a scatterbrained topic. We definitely, as usual, came up with this last week, right after the last the last podcast, and we definitely did not spend only 5 minutes discussing. We are consummate professionals. Definitely look forward to us doing this more next year. And I'll have some announcements in the new year that are fun, and look forward to it. Happy holidays, chat. Happy holidays, Braden.
I think Lewis Carroll may have said it best in Alice in Wonderland, where Alice goes, "But I don't want to go among mad people," and the cat goes, "Oh, you can't help that. We're all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad. We're all quite mad here. Thank you for watching, and hack on."